So you have really this perfect storm that is developing right now that should be extremely bullish for gold and gold stocks. You have massive money printing that is only going to get bigger and bigger um, without any opposition coming to the deficits. And the taxes that are going to be increased, they are actually inflationary as well, because the tax increases are aimed at producers, not consumers. The rich people that are going to be paying these taxes, they're not going to be reducing their consumption in order to pay these taxes. They'll be reducing their investment, because it's the investment dollars that get taxed. That marginal money that would otherwise be saved and invested ends up getting sent to the government. So very wealthy people, just because they're paying more taxes, it doesn't mean that they're going to have to cut back on their lifestyle, because most very wealthy people only spend a small portion of what they earn. The rest of it is invested in enterprises that grow the economy, that add to the production of goods and services, that create jobs. It's that investment that ends up being curtailed in order to fund the tax payments. So, that's going to result in less output, less real economic growth, and more money printing. In addition to that, we are also now talking about wide-scale student debt forgiveness. And a lot of people are overlooking the inflationary aspects of that. Because if we have $1 trillion of student debt, and we have a lot more than that, but let's just say we forgive $1 trillion worth of student debt, that's $1 trillion that those students were supposed to return to the US government, right? Or return to their lenders. Now, if the debt is forgiven and it's private debt owed to a bank that the government has guaranteed, if the government tells the student, hey, you don't have to take money out of your paycheck and pay the bank that loaned you the money, the government is going to print the money. The Fed is going to print the money and give it to the bank. So the money supply has to be expanded every time a student loan that is owed to a private lender is forgiven, because the government guaranteed that debt. And so if the student doesn't pay it, the government will. And the government's not raising taxes on other Americans to cover those forgiven loans. So the money's just going to be printed. Now, if the lender is the US government, if the US government directly loaned money to US students, well, US students were supposed to pay that money back. Well, now if they're not going to pay that money back, well, that's inflation too, because money that was going to be transferred back to the government now remains in the private sector. So all of this student loan forgiveness, unless they're talking about a specific tax increase to cover the cost, which they are not, it all amounts to massive inflation. And now, of course, the former students who are now relieved of the obligation to repay the money they borrowed to get their worthless degrees, they now have more money to buy goods and services, right? Well, they didn't produce more goods and services, but they're going to consume more goods and services. And all of this is evidenced by our skyrocketing trade deficits. It's not just that we have the biggest budget deficits in history, we have the biggest trade deficits in history. In fact, our most recent merchandise trade deficits was an all-time record high. Americans are importing more, but we're not actually exporting, because a lot of the people aren't even working. And you need to produce products before they can be exported. And a lot of people are looking at this booming US economy, and they're not realizing that it's not the economy that's booming. It's consumption and spending. That's where the boom is. But what is making this boom possible? It's overseas economies that are producing all the stuff that we're consuming, and they're putting it on ships and sending it to the US. That's why the ports are backed up. They've never been so congested. And the cost to ship goods into the United States, I don't know what it is, 5 times or something like that higher than the cost to ship goods out of the United States. And in fact, almost all the containers that are leaving the US are leaving empty, because they're just being sent back to Asia so they can be loaded up with more consumer goods and sent back to America so Americans can buy more stuff that they didn't produce. So this is not economic strength. This is a massive inflationary bubble. So given this unprecedented amount of debt, trade deficits, budget deficits, unprecedented amount of money printing, and zero opposition from anybody, and looking at the fact that we're just getting started, that these massive deficits that we're looking at today are going to get bigger and bigger tomorrow. You know, the difference between now and earlier, like following QE1 or QE2, is that the markets incorrectly believed that that was temporary, that those were emergency measures that would never be repeated again. Now, of course, I was sounding the alarm back then. I was saying Bernanke was lying, that this was not a temporary measure, that it was a monetary roach motel. We had checked in, we could never check out. We'd have more QEs than Rocky movies. We'd have QE infinity. The markets didn't believe me, they believed the Fed. But now the Fed is not even really trying to pretend that this is temporary. I mean, this is a permanent source of government finance. This is not abnormal. 0% interest rates are the new normal, right? And the deficits that we have now, they're not some temporary way to get us through a crisis. We're now permanently relying on those deficits, which have to get bigger and bigger and bigger as time goes by. And if you look at what we're doing now with these extended unemployment benefits, we are incentivizing millions and millions of Americans not to work by providing them with more money to not work than they would earn if they returned to work. Now, people aren't stupid. They are going to respond to these incentives, and so they're taking the government's, they're taking them up on their offer, and they're not working, and they're enjoying their paid vacations. Well, where is the money coming from to pay them? The Fed is creating it. Are these vacations going to end? No. I don't see the politicians in Washington now telling voters who are on these extended paid vacations that the vacation is over and it's time to go back to work, especially when they can bring out the excuse that keeps on giving, and that is, well, I don't want to get COVID. I'm worried about getting COVID. I mean, look, I'm here in Puerto Rico. The schools opened up for about 2 weeks after all of the teachers in Puerto Rico got vaccinated, right? They were the first in line to get vaccinated so we could reopen the schools. And then all of a sudden, supposedly there's a spike in COVID cases. And despite the fact that all the teachers are vaccinated, the schools closed down again. And they're probably closed again for the rest of the year.